Welcome back to another Explainer. So, sometime this decade, humanity is actually heading back to the moon, with the upcoming Artemis missions gearing up to send intrepid astronauts right to the lunar South Pole to search for water and volatiles. There's a massive, looming question hanging over us. We're all kind of wondering, is our return going to be this cooperative, scientific endeavor for the benefit of everyone? Or are we looking at a chaotic, Wild West-style land grab where the most powerful nations just take whatever they want?
Look, when you picture the stark, beautiful lunar surface, it's super easy to imagine a frantic scramble for rare Earth metals and resources. I mean, the media warns us about this impending chaos all the time, right? But what's truly fascinating, and what a lot of folks don't realize, is that humanity actually tried to write a rule book for the moon decades ago. It was this bold, highly intellectual attempt that was unfortunately widely ignored by the very nations it was trying to govern.
Which brings up the ultimate question: who actually owns the moon? To figure that out, we need to dive into the fascinating, wildly character-driven history of the 1979 Moon Treaty and find out exactly why it failed to take hold. It's a story packed with visionary lawyers, intense Cold War paranoia, and a fundamental debate about the very nature of human exploration.
Here is how we're going to map out this forgotten history today. First, a lunar Wild West. Second, the moon's first lawyer. Third, the law of mankind. Fourth, the Cold War steps in. And finally, a treaty left behind. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, a lunar Wild West, the present and the past. Okay, so to really grasp this, we first have to look back at the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which actually banned military bases in space. Building on that foundation, the 1979 Moon Treaty was honestly a remarkably bold document. It strictly forbade any threat of force, it outlawed nuclear weapons, and it mandated strict environmental protection. But here's the most radical part: it outright banned claims of national sovereignty, declaring lunar resources the common heritage of mankind just to prevent a scramble for territory. It was explicitly designed to divorce lunar exploration from the rapacious, historically destructive legacies of Earth's frontier conquests, things like the Columbian Exchange or the scramble for Africa.
Moving on to Section 2. The moon's first lawyer, Aldo Armando Coca.
To see where these incredibly idealistic concepts even came from, we've got to travel all the way back to the 1950s. Enter Aldo Armando Coca, a truly visionary Argentine lawyer. Get this, in 1953, at just 29 years old, he submitted the world's very first dissertation on space law. By 1957, he published his theory of interplanetary law, which directly influenced that 1967 Outer Space Treaty we just talked about. And then, by 1969, he submitted the very first Moon Treaty draft to the UN. The guy was literally in a race against time, trying to invent the legal framework for space before technology completely outpaced human morality.
That takes us to Section 3, the law of mankind and building a new framework.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Kaka shifted the legal focus entirely away from individual nations and placed it directly onto humanity as a whole. He developed this philosophy of jus humanitatis, literally the law of mankind. He argued that the moon is res communis humanitatis, meaning it's a common heritage belonging to absolutely everyone. His logic was that because space exploration is a collective human effort, the resources out there couldn't just belong to whoever happened to arrive first, regardless of how wealthy or technologically advanced that specific nation was.
To build out this legal architecture, he started by defining what he called negative law. Basically, this lays out exactly what states absolutely cannot do in space. The moon does not constitute a territory, it cannot be declared sovereign by anybody, and there are zero rights of ownership, period. He was explicitly blocking out the traditional tools of imperialism right from the jump.
And on the flip side of that coin, we have his positive laws, which dictated what states actually can do. The moon must be free for utilization by everyone. But we have to establish international regulations for exploiting those resources, kind of similar to the shared freedom of the high seas on Earth. Oh, and he also wanted to establish a right-of-way for interplanetary travel.
So Kaka's ideas were heavily championed by the Global South, and they culminated in a formal treaty draft submitted to the UN in 1969. And guys, the timing here is absolutely critical. He submitted this draft just weeks before the Apollo 11 landing. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin brought back 50 pounds of lunar rocks packed with titanium, silicon, and aluminum, it spurred this massive wave of global anxiety about imminent mineral exploitation. Suddenly, Kaka's theories weren't just academic thought experiments anymore, they were urgently real.
Which brings us to Section 4. The Cold War steps in as superpowers clash at the UN.
Because right as Koka's humanist ideals were really gaining traction, the gritty, intense reality of the Cold War completely hijacked the process. The USSR stepped in with its own treaty draft in 1971, mostly to secure political clout and advance arms control. Meanwhile, on the other side, the US basically panicked. American politicians and business leaders feared that the phrase common heritage was some sort of Marxist plot designed to redistribute wealth and destroy free enterprise in space.
So, the crucial point to take away here is that this noble attempt to govern the moon became hopelessly entangled in terrestrial paranoia and superpower rivalry. You had the United States wanting to preserve absolute freedom of action for private enterprise, while the Soviet Union wanted to preserve principles of national sovereignty, while simultaneously posturing as this great leader in preventing sovereign claims. It was a total mess. This massive clash of ideologies left the treaty stuck in limbo for years.
Finally, Section 5, a treaty left behind and the aftermath.
After some seriously grueling UN negotiations, the Moon Treaty was officially adopted in 1979. But, well, it was essentially dead on arrival. Only a meager 18 nations ever actually ratified the agreement. That is a staggering failure compared to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. Major space powers like the US and the USSR completely refused to sign it, which instantly stripped the document of any real geopolitical legitimacy.
And in a tragic, or maybe just incredibly comical irony highlighting just how badly the treaty failed, an American car salesman and former ventriloquist named Dennis Hope literally claimed the moon in 1980. Seriously. He wrote a letter to the UN pointing out there is a loophole in the treaty. It does not apply to individuals. And then he just started selling off the moon for $20 an acre, fully exploiting the lack of individual regulation. And amazingly, 3 sitting US presidents eventually bought lunar property from him. You can't make this stuff up.
So as humanity actively prepares to step foot back onto the lunar surface today, we are left to ponder what this abandoned treaty actually means for our future in space. Is the Artemis generation going to step up and govern the lunar frontier with the kind of foresight and cooperation that Aldo Kaka dreamed of? Or are we just doomed to repeat the chaotic, resource-driven land grabs we've seen throughout Earth's history? What you really should take away from all this is that the rules of space are incredibly fragile right now, and how we choose to govern the moon in this exact moment is going to set the precedent for humanity's entire cosmic future. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep looking up.